progress, pitchforks, plaudits, pick your P. We're going to do so here on the Thursday Night Postgame show. James Madison 14, Georgia State 7 in the Panthers Sunbelt opener at Center Park Stadium on Saturday, October the 4th. They were picked to lose by 20 plus, 19 and a half, 20 and a half, 21, take your pick based on whichever Vegas book you're looking at. So certainly better than expected on the field, but that almost makes it worse because this certainly felt like a gettable win. And some of the same things that cost them in some of the more blowout losses in September, those were still around. We'll get into it. My name is Brady, as always joined by David. David, welcome to another post-game show. And probably, it's still a loss, but maybe the most cheery, even countering the Murray State one, which was a win, because my expectations were low. We both picked them to lose this game in our pick-em on the regular pod. I do picks for Panther Talk. I picked this one against the spread. I expected James Madison to cover the spread just for the fact that we hadn't seen a Georgia State team that was going to be capable of hanging with James Madison. And at the very least, we did see that on Saturday.
We certainly did. I think if you had told us on, whatever day we recorded last week that Georgia State was going to lose this game by 7, I would be, beside myself probably, just in terms of this is not the type of Georgia State team that I think we would expect to cover the spread. There's covering the spread, and then there's okay, they, have every opportunity to go win that game. And I mean, not scoring in 3 of the 4 quarters is obviously not good, but they had opportunities, it's not a matter of they didn't have their chances. But I did not see that game coming from a mile away. And we'll certainly get into what happened and, what we can take away from it. But I think I came away from that game feeling it was the first game in a while that I didn't feel bad. And that I will take.
So let me run through the numbers here. I've got them up on screen if you're watching on the YouTube, or I guess on the Spotify as well, because there's video component there. James Madison, 285 yards of scrimmage offensively, which is tied for the third lowest they've had in the 2 years under Bob Chesney. It's also only the 8th time in the last 4 seasons they have been held under 20 points. Georgia State, 249 total yards, 212 through the air, 37 through running the ball, whereas it was the reverse for James Madison, only 74 rushing yards, 211 on the ground. It was sure a penalty fest both ways, and something that I think both coaches will be frustrated with. Whichever coach won the game was still going to be griping about a lot to clean up there. But 11 for 100 penalty yards for JMU, and 15 for 114 for Georgia State, as they are through 5 games on pace to be the most penalized team ever. At least as far back as I can track stats, because they are averaging 93 penalty yards a game. Makes them dead last, and there's been no one, but I think a Toledo team a couple of years ago that had 90 plus as an average, so certainly some concern there. And it was a game that they had chances. If you look at kind of the way the game went, Georgia State led 7-0 at halftime because they had the only points in the first half on a 19-yard Camden Overton Howard 19-yard Camden Overton Howard touchdown catch thrown by TJ Finley, who played the lion's share of the snaps at quarterback in this game for Georgia State, which I will submit is not really a storyline, but I guess we can get into it. But they could not make that lead stand up. They could not add on to it, which I think was the biggest overall missed opportunity of this game for Georgia State. But Alonzo Barnett III gets a 1-yard rushing touchdown in the third quarter to tie it. And then on a short field, 28-yard drive gives JMU the lead with a Wayne Knight 9-yard rushing touchdown, and multiple possessions in the fourth quarter there for Georgia State to have an opportunity to tie or take the lead, but they are unable to do so. I referenced it earlier with the penalties. Certainly a concern when you have a plethora of false starts. 14 was the number of overall turnovers. And I'm pulling up from my article right now on Panther Talk. 7 of those were either false starts or snap infractions. 6 of those were in the fourth quarter. 4 of those were in the final drive of the game when they were down 7 and needed a score. They kept getting in their own way, making the situation worse, even down to a 4th and 13 at their own 36, turning into a 4th and 18. The odds of converting either of those are not great, but it's even worse when you add on the 5 yards. So it was an unfortunate story of the game. A game they had a chance, I think, to win, and certainly would have rewritten a lot of the narrative around this team if they're able to pull off an upset. I still think you have to give credit to the defense for having a good game plan and executing really well and making JMU grind it out. But I think the thing I would say is you had the Dukes frustrated. They were playing frustrated. They weren't able to do what they wanted to do coming into this game. But you never had them on the ropes. You never got up 2 scores and had them really pressing and never forced them into any mistakes that kind of flipped the game. And they were able to just kind of get to their stuff late in the game and just kind of run the ball a lot and started to have some more effectiveness as time went on.
Yeah, I think starting with the defense makes a lot of sense. I think I came away most impressed by the defense. You know, I think we should just be honest based on, you know, looking at the yardage. The game was certainly close. Alonzo Barnett did not have a good game, like just straight up. You know, 50% completion percentage, under 100 yards completed. You know, was not really effective with his throws. He did not hit open receivers, and I think Georgia State also closed a lot of windows. I really want to give a lot of credit to, one, the defensive line. I mean, they really... I do not think that James Madison's offensive line had great pass protection. And, you know, Georgia State had, 4 tackles for a loss, you know, only 1 sack. So it's not like they, you know, were able to get that blow, like you said. But I really feel like they did such a good job in, you know, the passing game. And that's been an area where Georgia State has gotten torched this season. That I look at that 211 rushing yards and I don't come away all that upset about that number. And also, you know, they had to earn all 211 of those. You know, yes, there was a couple of big runs on the drive that James Madison tied the game on. You know, there was the run right before Barnett kind of pushed it in. You know, so that I feel bad. I don't know. I can't remember which running back it was.
A trio of 20-plus runs, which...
Right.
In grand scheme of things, you still held them what was 30-ish yards under their average. Near 40, exactly. Actually. So, like, 211 on 43 carries, 4.9 yards per carry. That's pretty good against this James Madison team that this is what they do well. So you're grading on a bit of a curve there, but I still always believe, like, I needed to see it, but I thought this was a better defense than what they had shown the first month of the season. We had been talking about we thought they were the better unit, and I still think that's the case. And we saw some of that in this game, which felt important. And
I agree.
It wasn't just, I wouldn't say it's just the front seven. It was kind of a whole effort because you'd be throwing some blitzes in. You know, I forget which, it was one of the series in the first half. Shams Gianni had a pressure or a hurry, maybe even a hit, got to Alonzo Barnett. They were doing some more of the blitzing we had seen against like Ole Miss, against Memphis. And I think it's effective, and I think they just got to stick to that. But the truth of it is they were daring James Madison to beat them through the air. A lot of stacked boxes, really prepared numbers-wise against the run, and just saying, yeah, go ahead, read this out, beat us this way. And bad day for Alonzo Barnett. He was not capable of doing so a lot of the time. And then there were other instances where the pressure got home. And the sack play I want to single out is a real positive because it was a heck of a play by Bishop Thomas who ends up getting the sack because it's a third down. It's kind of a you cannot take a sack down for Alonzo Barnett because they're in field goal range if he just throws it away. But he works upfield a little bit as he's moving to his right because he sees a bit of a lane, and the 300-plus pound nose tackle gets the angle exactly right to cut it off to where if he goes for the quarterback and gets a bit aggressive, he might skirt by there and have at least a lane to get the first down, if not a lot more yardage. He did a really good job of playing the quarterback run and keeping him contained and then going in for the kill and getting him to the ground. And then they were forced to punt. Now, the next part of that was the punt gets down at the 1. Georgia State's offensive drive stalls exactly where that is, and JMU gets it right back in favorable territory, and they score. So there's a second part of the story that the offense couldn't keep their end of the bargain up, but that felt emblematic of a play. Georgia State just was where they needed to be a lot of times. And, the other part was sometimes JMU just blocked up their runs really well. They're a good offensive line. They've got good backs. Jordan Fuller goes for 94 on 18 carries. Wayne Knight, 85 on 13 carries with the 1 touchdown. They kept the running game from the quarterbacks totally contained. Alonzo Burnett got a rushing touchdown, but it was from the 1-yard line. He had that 1 yard on 4 carries, counting the 7-yard loss on the sack, so 3 for 8. That's still great. They bring in Matthew Saluka for a 4th down, like the most obvious 4th down, like what was going to happen on that play, and they were ready for it. And they got it for a loss, and instead of taking the points, James Madison goes for it on the GSU 15 and comes away with nothing in the first half and helps preserve that shutout. I still think even looking at the 211, there's things you can point to that they did well in the run game, and just at the end of the day, they could only keep it contained for so long, and James Madison was going to start getting theirs and get after it in the run game, and they got enough done. But even there, even the 14 points, the 211 rushing yards, will not be satisfactory enough for them. They probably feel like they left some points and some opportunities on the board, but I think that's because Georgia State's defense came ready to play, and that is a real credit to the work Travis Pearson did in the off week and the mentality of the guys that I don't think you could have drawn up a worse September. And they were ready to go, flip the script in October, and they competed. They gave the team a chance to win.
Wholly agree. And part of why I'm not upset by that 211 number is if you just look at the balance that James Madison, we talked about it, in the preview pod. If you look at the balance that James Madison has, the only thing that they could do was kind of get their running game going. Yes, obviously 211 is still a big number, but that was their entire offense for the game, pretty much. So really, really big shout out to Georgia State's defense. Anytime that a team who is the worst scoring defense in the country then comes back and faces the proverbial conference favorite and only allows 2 scores in the entire game, that's a good day. We can talk about the penalties. James Madison also is a highly penalized team. I think their average is like 13 yards per game off of Georgia State, something like that. Yeah, they have 80 penalty
13 less than
yards.
Yeah,
correct.
So yeah, and I'm sure again something both these coaches want to clean up. Other thing that on the defense before we totally leave it, should you say again, Jartavius Flanoy is really good. True freshman in there at nose tackle, kind of the big body they haven't had at that position since like Julian Laurent, who ended up playing the CFL for a little bit. Because they've had guys like Dante Wilson who are smaller guys and effective what they needed to do. Then Thomas Gore after him, they're just really good, but not necessarily the big body like Flanoy is. And he, as a freshman, is in there. He got a big run stuff on 3rd and 2 for no gain, forced a punt. I believe that was in the 4th quarter. I think that gave them that final drive down 14-7. So making plays even as they were getting a bit ground down in the run game over the stretch of the second half. The other thing that was interesting... Go ahead. Yeah, take it.
Just really quick. It's a pity that one of his penalties was very decisive in keeping James Madison
I think the hands in the face was on Marlon Dean, if that's what you're talking about.
No, it was the encroachment or offsides or whatever.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Like it was like 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 or something.
Fittingly, the game ended on an offside on a pre-snap thing. Just the one that the defense got bad after all the false starts by the offense. But the hands of the face that it was a 3rd and 8, I think, when it was still a 7-0 game into the second half. Extends a drive, would have been probably a punt, maybe a go-for-it decision, but I don't think a field goal for JMU. Then the next play is the 23-yard run or 22-yard run for Wayne Knight down to the 1. And then they score the next play after that. So that was the one time where it's like you really pin a mistake on the defense, but given the rest of the game, it's really hard to say that was the decisive bit. But the other thing I wanted to mention on the defense was got a little bit of personnel flippage. We're seeing some Deuce Walker on the outside at cornerback. He had played corner last year, but more like nickel, and this year he started as safety. We saw him lining up there. We saw Deuce Fillmore playing a lot more nickel and playing maybe less snaps, but coming in for like passing downs, coming playing nickel. Del McGee talked about it a little post-game. I had to ask because I'm digging in the weeds on this stuff, even after these close losses when there's other big picture things to ask about. And they like Deuce Fillmore in run support. They're in that nickel slot, kind of maybe... He's a little undersized, but he plays tough, and obviously they trust his cover skills, and so I thought it was interesting. I think you really have to say secondary feels like the strength of this defense, I think, and you'd love to see them get some more impact plays and get some interceptions, because I think that they've played better than certainly like what the passing yardage shows. Struggled against Vanderbilt, but basically everything the defensive side of the ball did against Vanderbilt. I think you are not going to count on 74 passing yards a game the rest of the way, but they might get on a run here where like the ball starts bouncing their way, and if they keep getting the positions they're getting into, like Jordan Huff had a couple of plays where there's one for sure he could have had a pick. I think it would have been taken off the board by the illegal hands to the face anyway, but he jumped a route. There's one, Josiah Robinson had a better chance of getting a pick than the receiver did of making a catch on a third down. That they're getting in positions. I feel like it could be coming, especially look down the track of some of the teams they play that are going to be throwing the ball more and maybe have been a little bit turnover prone. I think they could have a moment the next couple of weeks, but this was kind of the first overture towards the defense really getting back in the game, helping their season numbers out a good bit, and holding a team under 20 points for the first time under Del McGee, and it was against the Sun Belt East favorite in the preseason. So certainly not on them that Georgia State did not win this game. They did everything in their power to get Georgia State across the line in this one.
Certainly did. And it was a really good performance. And I don't even want to say, switching to the offense, I don't even want to say that the offense was bad. It just wasn't good enough. I think I texted a buddy yesterday, and we were kind of talking about Coach McGee, and this was prior to me kind of really digging into the game, and I think I have unfortunately figured out what Georgia State's offense's problem is. It sucks because we spent so much time in the offseason talking about it, and we heard so much about it in the first couple of weeks. And if you're only looking at opponent TFL numbers, you might not catch really what the issue is. I don't think this offensive line is good.
Nope.
And it's a real problem. So much so that I've kind of I made a point yesterday mentally to go back and kind of chart some of the runs. And in doing so, I realized like there's nothing that these running backs can do, it really is a problem just how this offensive line has been playing. Cause I just really don't think it has mattered who has been the opponent, outside of Murray State, it's been bad. Unfortunately, it just really has been bad.
Now I'll add this context because the opponent had a say in this at least a little bit. These are James Madison's numbers after this game through 5 games. They are third nationally in total defense. So that's yardage allowed. They are 5th in FBS in number of first downs allowed. 9th in passing defense. 12th in rushing defense. They have the 13th most sacks, and they are 14th in pass efficiency defense. That is from the guys at JMU Sports News who tweeted out those statistics earlier today. That's a really good defense. And we knew going in, like I kind of put my keys to the game on Panther Talk, on the GSU 247 affiliate, that like the number one key was going to be finding a way to run the ball against all odds. And it's like we knew going in this was going to be a big ask. This was a really good rush defense, and Georgia State had not shown a lot to give you hopes that they would be able to put up a big number in the run game. But it was going to be kind of like how they needed to do it. And it's almost a credit to the way they were able to kind of manage that game, that they had 28 minutes of possession. Like they almost played time possession even, despite the fact they had 37 rushing yards. Like that is certainly a marvel when you factor in what it usually takes to keep a hold of the ball. 7 of 15 on third downs when you did not run the ball at all. Still under 50%, so it's still not a great number, but it's factoring in everything. Like that's pretty decent. And there were some good long passes to convert some third downs. Camden Overton Howard had his best game as far as he had a touchdown, but he also was the leading pass catcher. He had 7 for 65, and he was a nice little outlet there in the middle of the field on some of those third downs to move the chains.
I feel like the touchdown was like arguably his worst catch. That was his worst play somehow.
It's an issue with the run game, and they tried stuff. There was a new look that we hadn't seen, I don't think, all year, where it was like a pitch to the short side. The running back's in a little sidecar next to the quarterback in the shotgun. First one was fumbled by Rashad Amos, which was not great, but I don't think it was going much of anywhere anyway. And they ran it again a couple plays later the other side, and there was a defensive lineman immediately in the running back's face, and it was a loss. Talking to the missed opportunities, there was the first one, because you get a 52-yard catch on the first drive of the game where the defensive back goes for the pick, takes himself out of the play, Ted makes the grab and just has the whole sidelines his ballpark. Gets caught, gets tripped up by his shoestrings at the 21. Georgia State ends up kicking a 48-yard field goal about 10 yards back because that's when those plays happen. The fumble happens, then the loss on the run play after that happens, and it's a long field goal. And yes, Braden McAllister misses from 48. Georgia State's now 1 of 6 on field goals on the year. Not great, but 48 for a college kicker is not automatic, and you're already losing when you are within a breadth of the red zone and you're taking a long field goal. That's the offense not doing their job in that situation. Like, you're trying different things. They're moving different guys in. They're trying different groups of 5 along the O-line. They're running these new runs to the outside. I would have said they needed to do some more outside runs. I think I maybe even did say on this podcast they needed to work to the outside more because they were having some more success there. And it was not there today, or it wasn't there yesterday. They had Javon Robinson line up in the backfield on the first drive. They threw a little screen to him on the outside, and it was pretty effective. But I wonder if the longer the season goes on, if they need to actually hand off to him in those situations. If they're showing that, it might get a little bit predictable. All they're going to do is run those little bubble screens to him. But it's not for a lack of trying different concepts. And the other part of this is quarterbacks, because we always talk about those. I really don't think it was a factor. I thought TJ Finley was fine. He missed a go ball to Ted Hurst that would have been a touchdown. But I think it's really unfair to be like, and Cam Brown would have definitely made that a complete pass. Like, we don't know. It's unfair to both those guys to kind of play that hypothetical game there. But that was another opportunity where that was a touchdown. If the throw was more on the money, it would have been a 14-0 game, and that's where you start putting JMU under pressure. There's a screen pass earlier on that drive, I think 3 plays earlier, that Ted runs into his lineman, or he's gone. It was super set up. And again, speaking to the things that they're doing to work around the lack of a run game, they kept working some of those mid-screens, some of those delayed screens, and a couple of them were close, and you had linemen running into receivers, and that can't happen. But I don't see it as an issue of a lack of trying things to get around the obvious issue. Execution is to letting them down in those spots, and it's the ultimate thing is you really can't game plan around not being able to run inside dive. Like, no matter who is the quarterback, and maybe if you have Cam Brown in there, you can try some more unique things with how you involve the quarterback in the run game, but like, truthfully, if you can't run inside zone, it really doesn't matter who's quarterback, because that's going to be a foundation of any offense who is going to have success on the ground. Look at what James Madison was doing. They ran a lot of just inside runs that were able to get them at least 5-6 yards and get them ahead of the chains on their offensive series.
Yeah, and, one thing about the running that I guess was something that I just, was frustrating to see was, from your vantage point, I don't know if you were able to track it, it really looked like James Madison had some light boxes, and I think that kind of affected the passing game because there were certain times where, obviously we don't have all 22 or anything like that, but it definitely felt like Finley was in between on some of his throws.
I'm kind of all 20. We're like in the corner, so like it's not like we're not straight on, so I can see some of that stuff. I wasn't necessarily tracking it that tightly, more focused on the Georgia State side of things, but you're right that they were not just conceding the passing game. They were trusting that their front seven was going to do what they needed to with just the numbers that they wanted to commit to the run game, and it was effective. They've got really good players up there.
Certainly do. And I don't know. I don't think that Finley played poorly. I just think that this was a situation where he did not win Georgia State the game, and I don't want to sit there and say that it's all that negative because he didn't play poorly. I really don't think that he played poorly, and I think the most important thing for me about the offense as a whole, regardless of the only 7 points, there were 0 turnovers. They did not turn over the ball, no interceptions. There was a fumble, but it was not lost, and it wasn't really in contention of being lost. It wasn't like egregious or anything like that, but there was no turnovers, and I'm not sure how repeatable that is. I'm not sure if this was just a game with how, the situation dictated the plays that were ran. But for a team that has, put the ball in harm's way, and done the penalty thing, that is something that I will applaud them for, because they did not turn over the ball. And that's so important if they're going to have hundreds of yards and penalties every single game.
Yeah, I guess on that, it's the second fumble in as many games for Rashad Amos, so that can't keep up if he's going to be your leading carrier of the ball. But even past that, and it's unfair to put it on him or whatever, Branson Robinson, some of these bigger type running backs, given the state of things, I think they got to keep trying to incorporate some of the scat back, some of the quicker guys, twitchier athletes, because you might not be able to count on running an inside run play and having just a hole develop, but you might need a guy who can juke and make a move and make something out of nothing, or you run stuff to the outside, or you use them as pass catchers, whatever it might be. Like I said, I don't think it was a lack of trying stuff like that, but I think you need to go deeper into it there and just kind of, you're almost halfway through the season. You might have to just stare at the situation and say, we are not going to be a good traditional run team, but you've got to find your way to get triple digits on the ground for sure, and beyond that, you're going to need games where you're going to need to rely on that even more than that, but 37 can't be the norm, so you got to go back to the drawing board. And look, if part of that is you decide we need to have Cameron Brown in at quarterback because he can offer you something and you can kind of redesign the offense around him in a different way, then you need to make that call. But I think it was a benefit to everyone involved that they just kind of let TJ Finley keep getting it, because I think the biggest problem was just the back and forth of it all. And you made an evaluation and you stuck to it, and he's 19 of 28, 198 with one touchdown, the 68% completion percentage, and I mentioned the go ball to Ted Hurst that was a little bit, needed more air under it, didn't connect. Maybe a couple other throws here or there that you'd want a better throw on, but I can't really put a ton on him. I don't know that Cameron Brown gets away from the first sack, which was they're running a little play action. Two guys come clear on the left side, and he rolls to the side where there's two guys in his face. I think Cam Brown is a great athlete, and he has made plays in those type of situations. I think he's probably also pretty much dead to rights on that sack as well. The second one was he was sitting back in the pocket waiting for a play to develop, and the pocket just kind of caved in on him. Again, I don't know if there's anything a more mobile quarterback can do in that situation because you're waiting for the pass play to be there. I think it was another one of those third and longs that they were stuck in because they couldn't run the ball. So it's you needed to wait for the pass play to be there. And then that last drive, I mentioned the false starts, and you go from 4th and 13 to 4th and 18. He didn't have time to sit back there because JMU was teeing off in the pass rush situation. He has to check down to Branson Robinson on the do or die. And you'd love to just kind of heave it, maybe just try and get a DPI there or whatever, but he just had to get rid of it in that situation, and that's why you don't want to be stuck in 4th and 18, because pass rush knows what's happening in that spot, and they're going to try and get you to offload it as soon as possible and don't want you to be able to step into a throw and just kind of hope for a connection or hope for a flag to be thrown. So the obvious statement of the century is that's why you don't want to be in 4th and incredibly longs, is it is not advantageous for you as an offense to score in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I think there are some things that the offense will take away from this. Blocking better. I think that is the most important thing to go forth next week. They're going to have to find a way to communicate better on the line. The play calling, was fine. And there was did you mention the Blackburn drop? Because man, that was killer.
Oh yeah, that was
killer.
After the sack, forcing the punt from JMU down at the 1. It's a 3rd down. There were a couple false starts on that drive as well. That was kind of the beginning of that late game trend. But it's 3rd and 6, I think. He had Leo Blackburn down the sideline. Throws right on the numbers. That was a drop, 100%. Receiver has to make that grab.
Yeah.
And so Georgia State has to punt. The punt is returned to the 28, and that sets up short field for the offense for JMU to get the job done and get that touchdown. But at the very least, if he makes that catch, even if the drive stalls, JMU is not starting in plus territory unless something goes dramatically wrong on the punt. And that in itself could have made the difference, because the defense had defended 29 yards of grass most of the day, but because they only had 28 starting out with on that drive, it was just a really tough ask. And they'd played a lot of snaps over the second and third quarter because that's when JMU started getting a lot. They ended up being on the field for something like 20 plays in a row because on the same drive, James Madison got 2 fake punts out of basically the same look conversions on them in the first half. No points come of the drive, which, as I heard Bob Chesney, JMU head coach, note after the game, has to be impossible and like a first forever to have 2 successful fake punts on the drive and not get any points out of it. But defense got hung out to dry a little bit and did their job there in the first half, but I think it took the toll over the course of the game, and that's something that I think Del McGee talked about in the post game as well. Just kind of like some of what James Madison was able to do in the second half and start having more successful run plays was just an inevitability of how much they were just going to it and keeping the Georgia State defense on the field and just kind of going to work.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up. There's some stuff that they'll need to do better next week. But if they repeat that defensive performance against teams with worse offenses, I really don't think that's. I think that our general thought about the defense is going to come true, and to something that you said on the midweek, the whole numbers for the season might not ever reflect what the true talent of this defense is. It's probably not going to happen.
Although taking nearly 7 points off your average in this game didn't hurt.
Certainly didn't.
You're not last in FBS anymore. Down to a not that much more flowery, but it sounds better than 48. 41.2 points per game allowed.
I'll take it. I'll take that. That really is not as bad considering that 48 is basically 50.
I mean, here's the thing. The penalties are just a drastic issue. And I should also say, probably not going to spend that much time on the special teams because, like I mentioned, JMU did not score on that drive with the 2 fake punts. But getting caught by the same fake look twice on the same drive, I don't know what the process on the sideline of going through, like what happens when a team gets a conversion on you. But it didn't happen fast enough because I don't know how they weren't ready for it the second time. Del McGee talked about it after the game and talked in terms of like almost laughing, like you don't expect a team to go for it in the 4th and 17 right there. And I just I don't really get that thinking. I think that going gung-ho on a punt block because you think there's no way a team's going to go for it is the exact reason a team's going to go for it. And so getting caught in that type of mentality feels like a misunderstanding of how this game theory works and just kind of how like the to and fro between the coaches works. But it didn't cost them in this game. The field goal early did, but like I mentioned, kind of put most of that on the offense. And look, you're going to have to start making field goals. You're going to have to start at least making it easier on the kickers and not having it be super long kicks. And the special team stuff is just a feature of this team. It's just not a well-coached special teams unit, and something's going to have to give on that, whether it's in the offseason or whatever, but we are still on pace for no normal special teams outings in 2025, and I'm sure everyone would like to see that come to an end and start to see some more normality, but in this instance, it wasn't the costly part of the game. It's weird to say because it just feels like the penalties are baked in with this team, but it feels like the easiest fix because if you just have 7 penalties a game instead of 15, if you have 60, 70 penalty yards instead of 114, you can work with that. Teams win with that. If you look even at the standings in the FBS as a whole of the penalty yardage, a lot of the teams around Georgia State near the bottom of the list actually do have winning records and it hasn't cost them. JMU is 4th last in FBS. Like you mentioned, 80 penalty yards a game. They're 4-1. Louisiana Tech, 81.2 penalty yards a game. They're also 4-1.
Ole Miss is undefeated, and they're at 114th in the league. In the country, and they're 68.
UNLV's undefeated.
Yeah.
They're 5-0, and they are second to last. They have 82 penalty yards a game. It's just been such a bad level, and they are, I think, 3 penalties more a game than any other team in FBS on average. It is just so unsustainably high, and the way it's happening, it is mind-numbingly frustrating to watch a team commit that many pre-snap stuff. As a fan, it's the worst way to see your team lose, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if there are people out there that are more discouraged about this loss than maybe our tone has suggested we are. But that's easy enough because it's like this is the foundational thing you do every practice. Like, it can't help but get better, right? Like, at least to a level where it's manageable, because you can't have 7 false starts in a game. You can't have 6 in a quarter. You can't have 4 in a drive. But, like, we haven't seen but the one time that happened. So it's like, surely it's going to at least get to a slightly better level, and that might be all it takes, because they weren't far off in this game, and there's a handful of things they can point to that if they just done 1 or 2 of them the right way, they might have been winners in a game they were favored to lose by 20 plus. So it's obviously not easy, because we've seen this team commit a lot of penalties over the first 5 games of the season, and it feels like it's not going to get a ton better, but I contend that it is not that hard for this to at least get to a place where they are shaving maybe 5 of those penalties off a game. And that honestly could make a big difference for this team in some of these games that might be more down to the wire than the first month of the season was.
I mean, against Ole Miss, they had 8 penalties for 60 yards. You could do that for the rest of the season, and I bet you everything would be better in terms of, how the games work. They still lost to Ole Miss by 50-something points, but when you're not facing that type of competition and your penalty yardage is so much more manageable, you're not having your offense, be so behind the sticks. You're not having your defense have to defend a 1st and 5 every single play. There's such a huge difference between 60 penalty yards and 114 penalty yards.
And like, penalties aren't created equal. There was one on JMU, a DB just kind of grabbed Ted Hurst and pulled him down for DPI. But if he doesn't, it's a Ted Hurst walking touchdown because he beat him off the line of scrimmage. And so it's like, there have been some of those this year where it's been like a good tactical penalty on Georgia State secondary to prevent a bigger play from happening. But it's the pre-snap stuff, it's the motion stuff, it's the not lining up stuff, it's not knowing the snap count stuff. And then, as positive even by Coach McGee after the game, it's the not getting plays in quick enough to where you're running against yourself. There were at least a couple of those false starts that happened because the play clock was getting really low, and you had a guy just kind of get out of the rhythm and go early because it's like he was seeing the clock was about to expire. Operationally, they've got to get better on that stuff as well as a coaching staff. But it feels so fixable. Like, we haven't seen the Georgia State team this bad at this type of stuff ever. There have been some bad Georgia State teams over the years.
Yeah, I would be more upset if it wasn't like, hey, don't false start. Hey, don't line up off sides. Like, if you're committing 100 yards of holding, for example, let's say that's what it was. Okay, then yeah, sure. Maybe we could talk about, the talent gap in your offensive line.
It is an issue that they were basically unable to get runs up the middle without holding.
I'm not saying it's not a problem. It is.
Usually you need something more than every play involves a hold. I know you could,
right.
The age-old, you can call a holding every play, but I think they legitimately had a right to call all of those holdings because there was some grabbing going on.
No, for sure. But in the last 3 games, there's been almost 45 penalties. I don't have the number, and I'm not going to go through 120... That's not math. 180 minutes of football to figure out what was what. But of those almost 45 penalties, I would be willing to bet that almost 30% of them are false starts, which is not good. Again, if it's a DPI, okay, play better coverage, fine. If it's a holding, okay, you know where you're supposed to be holding guys, and don't tackle defensive linemen or whatever. But when you're supposed to snap the ball and when you're supposed to start the play. You can't false start that many times. And it's not just the offense. It's the special teams. It's everybody. It's they haven't in a few weeks, I don't believe, but it's the defensive signal stuff. All of those things are penalties that are not even like, oh, this is easy to coach. Yeah, it's easy to coach because this is like you get to camp type stuff. This is I knew how to play football in high school and we stopped doing this type of thing. This isn't like, okay, I just was out talented, so I ended up tackling a guy who I knew was gonna, get to the quarterback and I tried to not get caught. Like, I could live with that. I can't live with 3 linemen not knowing the dang snap count. Like, I'm sorry, I can't do that.
Yeah, and so it's like the double-edged sword of like, saying all that, it clearly has been enough of a problem for this team that it continues to crop up. And so you're 5 games in and almost expecting a lot of penalties every game, which is not where you want to be when you're evaluating a coaching staff. But I feel like if you're 5 games into the season, you'd rather have that than be the situation that it's like we cannot defend the pass at all, and we're giving up 400 yards through the air. Like, this is so much more eminently solvable than some teams' fatal flaws across the sport this year that you don't want to have a team where you're like, the biggest issue is we can't line up right, but that is more fixable than what some teams are going through. And so it is going to be a test of this coaching staff to find it, and certainly continuing test of like seeing if they can be that type of team that doesn't beat themselves for the first time under Del McGee. But I'm certainly not going to cast aspersions on fans who are disappointed to see that. So no matter how many times Del McGee has mentioned pre-snap stuff, and no matter how many times he's mentioned Panthers don't beat Panthers, they're doing all of that stuff at large quantity through the course of the season, and it's not been good enough. So I'm not going to tell you it's going to get fixed. I'm just saying if you had to pick a list of like, one of these things is going to be wrong with your team and you need to fix it, that'd be the one I think every coach would take, because that is ultimately about focus and mentality, and that's the stuff that they control better than any. That is what they can control better than any other part of their game. They can't control the opponent, how good they are, the scheme. Like, they can control where their mind is every play, and it's not been good enough so far. And so the quest goes on. 1-4, 0-1 in Sun Belt play. They have App State at home this weekend, which we'll get into. Obviously, the boogeyman of Georgia State football is coming to town on Saturday, so lots of feelings, I'm sure, for Georgia State fans looking for anything to grasp onto. Feel like that's kind of run our gamut on the James Madison game. I don't know if you have any parting thoughts on the rest of what we just gone through, David.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't have much. Unfortunately for our interests, and just in terms of the way that the Panthers have been, this season has kind of gotten off to the start we expected. I will say, regardless of how the rest of the season goes, I think the hardest football games that Georgia State had on their schedule are behind them. That does not mean that they will do anything moving forward, but just objectively, I think the 3 hardest games that they had this year, they were always going to be Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, and James Madison in some order.
And Memphis.
Yes, I think Memphis is there. I just think they were going to be
top 25 Memphis.
I thought that Memphis would be worse than James Madison this year. I'm clearly wrong, but I just think that there is a chance that this season can be salvaged. I would love to sit here and have Georgia State win out, and all right, great, we figured it out. It turns the whole season around. What is that, 7-5? That'd be amazing. But
8-4 still on the table.
Yeah, sorry, that's right.
In your hypothetical alarm clocks going off situation.
Yeah. But I think that now is the opportunity for you to see some things that you can take away from a game like the James Madison game and put it forwards. I am encouraged that this was the best game that this defense has played. I think that I would have loved it if it had happened in a better way than against, Vanderbilt or Ole Miss. But we'll see, kind of what happens from here with the defense, because, that side of the ball is probably going to be what needs to lead if Georgia State is going to, kind of fight back and win some games down the stretch here.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest worry you had out of the bye week, out of a bad first month of the season, was the team was going to come out and just not look like they cared. They played hard. The defense clearly cleaned up a lot of stuff and gave it about their A game in this one. So you cleared the first hurdle of, like, the team is still bought in. They haven't been able to play clean enough and played a full game yet to get across the line against an FBS opponent, but this was an achievement versus the expectation of this game that was expecting a heavy defeat. And it might not feel all that much better in the moment, but if they can keep putting that forward and build on this defensively and not have a week where, like, next week they regress and give up a bunch of points again, if they can just keep working on the little things a little bit on the offense and the special team side of things, if they're in these situations again, they will be better suited against the teams they have left to win some of these games. If they're able to keeping it within a possession, have a 7-point lead in the second half of these games, they're going to have to find a way to put these leads, make them bigger, build on them, which was an issue last year as well. But, like, as you say, it doesn't get easy, but it gets easier. And you're gonna have opportunities over the next few weeks to maybe bank a couple of wins and feel positive and feel like it is trending in the right direction. You want to run the table, you want to be undefeated, you go 12-0, but winning streaks, no matter when they come, help. And it is certainly better to go from 1-4 to 4-4 than it is to go from 4-1 to 4-4. So you're not at the rock bottom, but the season has gone how it's gone. You've had a reason to maybe think process-wise things are getting better, at least on defense, and now we see what they we see what they do moving forward.
Yeah, well said.
45 minutes. I think this is our longest one of these, but hopefully you appreciate the extra insight. Ultimately, a lot to dig into in a game that is a lot closer, a lot more interest in digging in the weeds in a game that is only a 7-point margin.
I wonder how long these are gonna be if they actually win a game.
Yeah, other than the FCS, yeah, I do wonder. We'll find out together the next time we have one of these. But in the meantime, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the main show this week. And we're also pretty soon going to turn the page, start working in crossover season. It's basketball time. But thanks for listening to this Thursday night postgame show as James Madison defeats Georgia State 14-7 on October 4th in Atlanta, GA.